Hello, friends, and welcome to the September live show of Household. We know we're running a little bit late this time around, but we all needed to some extra time to read Babel by RF Kuang. So we're going to get started with introductions, and everyone will tell you who they are and what they rated this book. So, hello, I'm Mari from My Name is Marines. I'm mostly on TikTok these days, but my YouTube is still around. And I think I want to wait until the end of this conversation to decide what my rating is because I don't know yet.
I'm Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. And yeah, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm essentially using this conversation as group therapy to fully process how I feel because I haven't even rated it on my spreadsheet. I can't decide yet. So you're going to help me out.
There. Hi, everyone. I'm Paige. Paige Felicia across the internet. I think I know what I'm going to rate this book, but I'm going to hold it back and let the discussion go, and then we'll decide if it was the rating. I'll say what the rating initially was, and I'll say what it actually is at the end of the discussion. Yeah.
I'm Kayla, K-Shreese, all across the internet. And I also don't know what to rate this book. So I'm just going to wait to the end.
Great. Before we get into the discussion of this book, I'm just curious. I know, Sam, you have, but I don't know if anybody else has read the Poppy War trilogy, or was this your first RF Kuang book?
This is my first one. Yeah.
First. So only you, Sam.
Interessante. Okay.
So that's going to really impact because I have questions now about the initial. Should I go back and read that?
I mean, this is not. I think this is not an indication of my overall feelings. However, that series was kind of on my radar, but not really because of the way that people talk about it made it seem like not super for me. And after reading this, it's way down. I'm not prioritizing reading this at all. This sort of heartbreak, I'm just like,
That's valid.
But yeah, let's talk about this book.
I also am very I don't know how they feel. We're all very
we haven't talked about it. We haven't talked about how long it's taking us to read. We haven't talked about how we feel about this book at all together.
Oh God.
This is an interesting one. So I guess the thing, we usually start conversations talking about the characters and then moving on from there. But because this is a very atmospheric book and it is a very setting-driven book, I want to start with the world and move through there. But before we dive in, I will say that part of the problem that I'm having processing this is that this is a book that I can tell the quality of it, but my experience of my enjoyment of it is
interesting.
I didn't enjoy reading a lot of this. And I don't think that I was supposed to be fair. It made me feel as uncomfortable as it was trying to make me feel. So those kinds of books are really hard to process because I was hurt. I was I'm reading about abuse and racism. I'm not having fun. But it did that on purpose. So trying to parse that all out, I'm having a big time struggle, trying to decide that. So is that kind of where you guys are as well?
100%. Where I'm but so the problem that I am having is so when I rate my books on a spreadsheet, and there's different categories, right? And so there's some things that I think this book did well, and I think that R.F. Kuang's a good writer, and I think that she set out to do she did what she set out to do with this, right? There's other parts of it that just didn't work for me, and different things that I felt would have been better, and then so it makes it so certain things are up high and certain things are down low, and I'm but does this make it a 3-star? But it doesn't feel it's bad enough to be a 3-star. So I'm what? I don't know what to do. You know?
Meanwhile, this is one of the few books where I felt very understood in a way where I was the author took care in knowing what they were talking about, and I felt like you said, the quality fantastic, and I feel that really impacts my enjoyment of a book. Is if it's really well written, I'm going to enjoy it regardless, because I'm this author knows what they're doing, and therefore they're taking me on a ride, and I'm able to just sit back, not think about the mechanics of everything because they have it under control. And because I'm from the Caribbean, this specific story was just it was meant for like someone like me from like the colonialized perspective specifically of the UK. So like reading this book, I was like hearing about like the slave revolts and everything and learning about that in school, that like just made this an automatic. I was like enjoying reading it because I was like, what is she going to really explore and continue how she's going to dive deeper into it. So even though it was like racist and like hard to read, I feel like I've read those kinds of stories before and I've like built that tolerance to that kind of story that it didn't really impact me as much as like it sounds like it impacted you, Mari.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, obviously I've read stories that feature racism before, but there is, and this is what I've heard about the Poppy War trilogy that is true here. There is like a sort of fatalism to her writing where it feels like we knew the entire time that nothing good was going to come out of this. And it's left with that, like, okay, not only did I experience all of this, but there was like this like fatalism about like how I don't know, racism is racism and it's like here to stay. And like reading about past colonialism and knowing about the effects of colonialism still, and just like feeling the desperation of like, this is forever. Like, that just was so draining for me to read and to like constantly like be faced with the people treating them as subhuman and like those words said out loud constantly, even though I have obviously encountered racism, both intentional and unintentional in work before, that something about the package here was just really, really like heavy to me in a way that, like I said, while I could see the research and the quality and everything here, it was just a very like heavy and draining experience.
I think she did so well drawing attention to like just so many different little things. Like the moment that stood out to me a lot was the moment when they were trying to convince Letty and like telling her like what's going on.
I knew where that was going to go from the beginning. You just knew it was going to be so bad.
And then Robin's like, later on we realized that why are we still comforting her? Because like, it was like that moment is just like imprinted on my mind, and I'm like, this is brilliant, but also like so brutal and like just so real. And it's just I will, that moment lives in my head rent free.
Yes, I absolutely, down in my notes is like one of my favorite scenes. Because the other thing is that I think that there are flaws here. I don't think when I say that this is quality, I think she did a lot of things very well, but I think that there are flaws in some like plot and characterization things. And so there were some times where the exploration of themes I thought were better than others. And it might be like a personal preference thing. There were some things that were a little too on the nose and a little too like repeated and said, but that scene where it was more showing than telling, where they're trying to explain to her and in the end they all end up comforting her, that was such an impactful show over tell moment that I was like, this is like this book at its best. Some of the places where that exploration of themes wasn't quite for me was when we were sitting in literal lectures. And it was just like going on and on and on and on and on about translation and colonialism. Some of those scenes I was like, move it along. The pacing here, like we can't. And I've heard from other people that they actually love those scenes, like sitting in the lecture.
I enjoyed those. I thought it was a good way to like give, like it was like a good info dump like structure in terms of, again, going back to like the writing format. Like it was smart of her to do it in lectures because it would make sense that that was where they were imparting the information that we would need for later portions. And I feel like she's like over explaining for people who maybe would need that over explanation. So coming from like us, we're like, yeah, this makes sense. But like someone's reading that for the first time being like, oh my God, I've never thought of this before. So like I feel like it had to be done, which is why I sort of forgave and listened on 2.5 speed for those moments.
Like goes back to this idea of like who the audience is or who the audience is sort of like prioritizing. And it felt like it was often prioritizing people who didn't have experience with race. Like it was you know, the audience was those people that don't know anything about racism and colonialism. Like we have to spell it out in a way that, I mean, sure, I guess if that's your audience, but I think it did kind of hamper the story and slow the pace down because I too had to like speed through those sorts of things. And I just think that some of those moments were better explored when it was shown to us through character interactions and moments versus told to us.
I am so grateful that like this is how this live show is going because I was like, I'm gonna come in here and you guys are gonna be like, it's the most amazing. I'll be like, oh shit. Because you bringing up the show versus tell thing, I think RF Kuang has a problem with telling and not showing. In her writing a lot, actually. So like, for example, I know we're not talking about characters yet, but like the character interactions here, we were told so much about their dynamic, and then I don't believe it. Like they were like, we love Letty, we would die for you, and I'm like, you guys were annoyed by her the entire time. Like, what do you mean you guys were besties? Like, you guys hated her. Like, you snapped at her constantly. So like some of this stuff, I was like, I don't see it, but when she does do it well, it is done like so well. And yeah, the other part for me that left me a little like disappointed, even though we aren't necessarily owed that. Like, it's not feeling like, this is what we deserve. But I did feel so 101, where I was like, I was expecting this to be like a more complex, nuanced conversation. And there were so many things about some of the themes of colonialism and racism that were so on my nose. But then I also had to sit there, like you're saying, what was the audience? Where I was like, okay, this is written for like general population. And I have to realize that like the book community that's been doing this for a while and like knows this shit, like is kind of above like general population maybe. But like there were some things that I was like, yeah, like duh. But then I had to be like, well, it's not a duh for everyone. So there was a little bit of that like on the nose part that was tough. And I struggle with the way that she does character relationships, and that was true in the Poppy War too. Like where I was like, I'm being told that they're besties, and like I do not see it. So a lot of these, like the amount of character death in here that I feel like I was supposed to care about, I did not. The only character that I cared about not dying was Victoire. And I was like, good, great, glad she's alive. But otherwise I was like, this is not resonating because I don't see how you guys are close necessarily.
Like when Robin was like torn up about Griffin, right, dying.
Yeah.
They didn't really establish their sibling relationship.
Right.
Right. So I was just like, where's this coming from? Like, it was hard to believe it, to be honest. Like,
yeah. All right. We kind of,
yeah.
We're going all over. It's a web. It's a complicated web.
Yeah.
Let's back up here because I do want to get to the characters because I think that is one of the weaker parts of the story. But let's back up because I do still think that the best way to approach is starting at like world. And so this is very atmospheric book, obviously like dark academia. So how is the world building for you? How were the vibes and in general like Oxford as a setting?
I mean, I love the setting. At first, I was really enjoying like the atmosphere of the book and everything. It kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but it gave me the Name of the Wind vibes when he's at the university and everything. And I love the Name of the Wind. But then all of a sudden, obviously, like the brutality of it just like sinks into your soul a little bit. But I actually really enjoyed the setting. It was one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. That again, that academia setting and that like just discussion of how much they loved Oxford, I really liked it. I also would have still like to see it more. I don't know. I think that I just want more like immersion than I necessarily get sometimes with her books. And I just feel like, the only thing we really got about the school a lot was the lectures, right? And I wanted that, like, not to bring up She Who Should Not Be Named, but like the feelings that you get of like Hogwarts, like I wanted that on like a higher education level. I feel like you get it, like Name of the Wind is a really good example, Kayla, and like the Magician series also has a lot of this like academic setting that I feel like I just want a little bit more. But the talk of the translation stuff, which that feeds into the magic, which feeds into the world, the translation stuff was like perfect, obviously. Like that discussion of like the vagueness between words stuff was like so good. But yeah, I liked the stuff about like Oxford, but and you could tell this was definitely somebody that I get similar vibes when I read a book about somebody that like loves New York City. Like she loved being at Oxford, right? But then saw all these issues with it, and you could definitely like feel that. But I wanted a little bit more of like day to day, I guess, which would have also gone with like wanting more of their like character interaction stuff.
Yeah, like I feel like the Oxford of it, like it could have been any old time university. Like I didn't feel like it was just Oxford specifically because of how like it wasn't granular, it wasn't like grounded in any way because we were getting like a very like pared back like description of everything that was happening, and it was like skimming over a lot of time. I really liked like the silver working, like that element of the like world building I enjoyed because there was like structure to it, there were rules to it, it was like very straightforward. Like she mentioned something, I was like, they're gonna do that later because that's very like straightforward of like how they're gonna fuck this shit up. So like I like that she was like setting those things, and it was like very easy to follow compared to some other magic building that we've seen in the past in recent books that didn't quite make as much sense. So I'm really enjoying that.
I agree. I think that it's interesting. RF Kuang's writing is super interesting to me because it is detailed but not very descriptive, and you almost expect it to be very descriptive for like the chunkiness of the work itself. But it that is not her strong suit. I don't think is like building pictures with words. We're getting a lot of information in other regards, but I almost wanted a bit more juiciness to this because you got the feeling that it was supposed to be so atmospheric and the setting was so important to this, and it just lacked a little bit of oomph there for me. Like it wasn't very easy for me to picture things. A tower is all I got.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, that picture at the beginning, I was like, oh, that's what the tower looks like. Or like the cover. I'm like, nice, okay. Yeah.
But otherwise, like I said, I just wanted a little bit more like from the writing to really push it over the edge of like, a truly perfect, fantastic kind of book. I will say that I went through very quickly and I was like looking at 4, 5-star reviews, and then I was looking at like 1 and 2-star reviews to try and understand like what people were saying, and a lot of people complained in the lower ones about the magic system. And I honestly am not somebody who needs a very hard magic system. I can totally go with like a vibes magic system, especially here. Like I don't know why silver is magic. She doesn't really say, but the explanation of the translation and how the words like daisy chain and the way that pulls magic and like all of that was so good that I didn't care about like the lack of explanation for anything else. Like that portion of it was so neat to me that I was like, but some people really didn't like the haziness of the magic system. So how did you guys feel?
And I think it was the most brilliant part. Like I was like, there's obviously a lot of work that went into this. Like you talk about like a magnum opus of somebody. It seems like this is her baby. Like that feeling as you're reading.
Yes.
And also using the magic to like represent the industrial like revolution as well. It just was so smart. I was like so impressed just by that small change. I was like a small little mystical element to it that kept it a little interesting. And like what would happen if it had been like this instead of just the industrial revolution that we know it as. And I thought that was really cool. And like the little areas of like where the silver would be used, like in the carriages so that it would be safer to drive, and all the ways that it fell apart toward the end. I like the way she like put it in the world itself in small areas.
Yeah, I'm surprised that reviews had so much bad things to say about the magic system, because I do think it was so like both well explained and just like an interesting idea that like I've never seen anyone touch on before with like words. And you can tell that like she went to Oxford to study translation. Like so you can tell that she's like a linguist, just because of like how detailed some of these things are. And the one maybe slight, not even complaint, but the way that I could see this going a little bit better was because it was like a sort of one-to-one replacement for just Industrial Revolution stuff. I would have liked there to be maybe slightly more like, let's do more with this. Like this is unlimited sort of stuff. Like let's think of something a little more creative, just like the structure slightly better, like it's like, okay, sure, but could we do something else? I think I would like to see that a little bit more, but that's not necessarily like me saying I needed that. I was just surprised that there wasn't a little bit extra to like how much more advanced this world would have been at that time. It felt still very rooted in history still, in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting. But yeah, I liked that. And I even just liked I know this is sort of like a plot thing, but one of you mentioned that like, we kind of got like 2 Chekhov's guns here with like the bars and things and like whatever, and describing like, oh, this is how this works. And I wasn't necessarily sure how it was going to go down later, but I was like, okay, we're getting this like, when you can't have translate on a bar because that just like that is so, it shakes everything up, and there's no way that you could truly translation. I don't know. All the linguistic stuff,
yes,
I think was perfect. Like that was like the 5-star part of it for me.
And not to be clear, I don't know how widespread this complaint was. I literally was just like looking at Goodreads to pull out like, because I was like, how do I feel about this? Pull out things that people liked and didn't like. And so I saw a couple of Goodreads reviews saying this didn't need to be a fantasy. Like if you removed, it should have just been a historical fiction. And I think that is so wrong.
It needed to be in that element. Yeah.
you needed the silver element to really tie all together and drive home the entire point that it was making about like replacing sort of the Industrial Revolution and translation and the power of words and the magic of all that. And then there was so much about like the circular, almost like the snake eating its own tail kind of nature of colonialism. Somebody mentioned in the chat of like, you know, they were running out of Latin and Greek, so the magic was failing. And then there was so much of like absorbing language that was also kind of deadening sort of the magic, and needing like the other languages, but hating the people that it came from. And all of that I thought was so ingrained to the story. You couldn't just pull it out. No. It would be not the same story.
Well, also, I don't even know how you would do that, because the whole point is like they needed translators, and what would they use the translators?
Yeah, like what would the story have been if not the silver? Yeah.
That's odd. There are books like that where you could have done that. Not this one.
What's the one we always talk about? Chloe Gong.
Oh yeah.
Yes. The same story and nobody would have cared. That is not true.
No.
All right, so that was anything else about like world building or magic? Okay. Let's go. I was going to go like on from there, but I think let's go characters next. So we follow primarily Robin Swift, and he's like our main character for the majority. He is our main character, but we're kind of only with him for the first portion of the book, and then he meets everybody at Oxford and kind of goes from there. So what did you guys think of Robin?
So I'll say something. I have I think it'll be interesting to hear what you guys think, because I was comparing a little bit to Rin from the Poppy War, and I love Rin as a character. Robin, whatever. Yeah. Like, I don't feel super deeply about him. I actually, again, would have rather seen some of the other characters be the main character we follow. Like, I think, am I saying her name right? Victoire or whatever? Is that
yeah, Victoire.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm saying it right, because again, there's no like pronunciation guides and stuff. Her story, I think, would have been so much more interesting. Yeah. Like, infinitely. And I get that like RF Kuang is sort of writing from her own experience, and like she's Chinese and whatever, but I was like, man, I just really am not sure that like he was the best one to be the main here. But yeah, like I didn't dislike him necessarily, but it was just like, I'm just okay. I don't think he's going to necessarily stick in my brain. And I do think that overall, like we were talking about with some of the character stuff, I feel very much at a distance from her characters, like in general. Like Rin I really loved, but there was still this element of like distance. I just felt like very at a distance from all of them, and not like super connected to them and their experiences all the time.
Yeah. I felt like I felt for him, but every time I felt for him, it was circumstantial. I felt for him because he was being beaten. I felt for him because he was experiencing racism, but I never felt like I felt for him because I knew who he was as a character. There was like a lot of that distance built in. And I also got really frustrated with him. And some portion of it, I think I can like justify as like the frustration of following a character who's making bad decisions. But other portions of it, I think kind of veered into a little bit just like sloppy writing in terms of like, why didn't you just lie? Why did you do that? Like, why didn't, like, there was a lot where I was just questioning things where I was like, I don't understand. When Professor Lovell, like, comes up to him and he's like, what did you tell the translator? I don't understand why he just didn't say, oh, he asked me where I was from and how I got started at Oxford. He's just like, oh, in a way that I was like, I cannot abide this character, like, at all. And then to see that, like, the like extreme just sort of shift to the ends where he's like, burn it all down. I was like, it's a little bit too much for me. It's too sharp of a turn. I wish we had like gotten to know him a little bit more and done this like descent into burn it all down, like a little more gradually in a way. So
Rami or Victoire, I can't remember who it was, says something really interesting in the book that like made me understand his character a little more, where it's like, you do things because you think you should be the one suffering. Like, you took the fall for us because you thought you should be the one. So I like, from that point, it changed the way I viewed all of the choices he made, was him like taking the fall from the moment like he got beaten and he didn't understand why he was being beaten. And I feel like that shaped theoretically what I thought, like who he was as a character in terms of the choices he was making, where he was like, I'm just going to make this choice because it will be the easiest choice to make. And if I'm the only one suffering, then that's just how it's going to be. And I feel like that just got even sharper, like when he was in grief, was like, I'm gonna be this radical because I know it'll end in me dying, and that's ultimately what I want because like I'm done and like I'm tired and this is like me running away again. So that poor thing, it was the latter third where it was like you do this because you want to run away and you want to suffer yourself. That latter third, I was like, oh, I understand now the choices he's making. But the first 2/3 was very like I wasn't really caring about him other than like you said the circumstances that he was in.
I also feel like there was like a shift in his character after he murdered his father. Like I don't know about you guys, but I was like really surprised. I was like, did that just happen?
Yeah, that came out
same.
of nowhere.
Like,
He was also surprised that he did.
Especially because it's like he like Lovell like is approaching him, but it's not like he drew a gun. It's just like literally like he made a motion and Robin was like death. And I was like,
yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think even so, like, yes, that moment for him was a little bit of a shift, but also like I feel like there could have been more seeds planted post-murder that were a little bit more of this like rage brewing, right? Because when we get, like you said, Mario, when we get to the end, he is very much like the only thing that will end this is violence. We have to do the violent thing, and you're kind of like, for a lot of this, you were not a brave dude. You know, like from the very beginning, we're sort of showing him like running away from any kind of conflict or whatever. So I get that someone like snaps, but it didn't even feel like a snap. Like it felt like this was supposed to be like, oh, this is the inevitable conclusion. And it's like, not like we didn't get, again, it was too much of like a drastic change when I felt like there could have been some things that were sown kind of throughout of like him like being more angry and feeling like this was inevitable. And it seemed like it was like, okay, I killed my dad and then my brother died and like I have to take on his mantle. And it's like, because we didn't get a lot of the stuff with Griffin where we really felt like they were close, I wasn't really feeling like it made sense that he was right all along. I'm going to take up his mantle because we didn't get to see them really interacting that much.
I feel like it was the Rami death that was the thing that like made him go like, I'm going to burn it all down because Letty, I trusted this white woman and she killed this guy. So burn it all down. So I feel like that was like the like big moment where but like before he was sort of like, I could still do like the Babel thing and like just like live life. But then he was like, fuck it, I'm gonna kill everyone because everyone's already dead anyway. So what's the point?
I will say that the thing about Robin that I most like related to, and I see someone in comments kind of put that as well, but like his conflict about belonging to a system that is like faulty or like a system of oppression and like being the conflict between like his time at Babel being like the happiest he had ever been, but also and like not wanting to see the flaws because it had also been the happiest he had ever been, and that kind of like it reminded me a little bit of a book not everybody liked, what is called Catherine House, which also
haven't read that.
What it means to belong to a broken system and the lengths you'll go to like want to participate, right? And so all of that I thought was really thoughtful and really well done on Robin's behalf. It was just, I wish we got a little bit more characterization out of him, like a little bit more like really getting into his thoughts and his feelings and like description rather than, like I said, some of this more circumstantial stuff. Okay, let's go to Victoire because you mentioned like thinking about where Robin ended up. I thought it was interesting that at the end Victoire is the one who's like, nah, I want to live, gotta go. And again, I understood that, but I wish that had been seeded a little bit more also because I didn't feel like we really knew who she was as a character until the end. And then like at that moment, again, I felt a lot for her, but I was like, I don't really know where this is coming from. So what did you guys think?
She was definitely my favorite of like the bunch. I liked Remy at points too, but he got so bratty sometimes, not like with the structures, but like within their friend group that I was like, stop it. But like her, I don't know, I always just kind of like pulled for her and just some of the things that they talked about where it was like some of this discussion of like the Creole and like how she's trying to fight as like for that being like a language that they could use and whatever, and like how interesting some of those things could be. Like when we got some of these snippets, I was like, why are we not following her? Like her story is so interesting. So yeah, I think that like her sort of role in the group was really interesting, and also her like dynamic with like Letty as like the classic essentially white feminist. Like we get her little chapter, I was like, oh, we are just full like typical white feminist, like no intersectionality whatsoever, whatever, which again makes sense for the time. But it's like, wow. So to have them be like their dynamic of their like sort of supposed to be like best friends, but like your friend doesn't really understand you. Like all of that exploration, I think, have been really cool. I do want to talk about too how you guys felt about all of them, though. I felt like they used language that was very 2022 to talk about all of this. Yeah, and I was that threw me a lot. Where I was like,
there was one moment here
talking like that.
Remy said something about being a brown man, and I was like,
yeah,
so much about 1800s in Oxford, but I think it's a Twitter thing and not like Twitter in 2022. I don't think he would have used that language to describe himself. There were a lot of moments like that where it felt a little anachronistic, and it made me. One of the first things you read is her author's notes, where she's like, "It's fiction, suck it."
Yeah. No, I read that out loud to my friends who I was with when I started this book, and I was like, and my friend was like, I need to pick this up now just from that final line where it's like, deal with whatever I see.
So anytime I came across a moment where I was like, I just had her in my head, in the back of my head, going, "I can do what I want. It's fiction, suck it," kind of thing.
Right.
Like, okay, fine, I guess.
Yeah, I wonder. Like, I was curious about the ending for you, Maddie, especially with like the Victoire. Like, it felt very hopeful in a way that was surprising to me, because I was like, I thought like the Robin ending, I was like, this is what I was expecting. Yes, like this is the way it ends, and then we get like Victoire going across to America, being like, I'm gonna deal with more shit, but I'm gonna survive. And someone in the chat said like they felt like the characters were representing like the places that they came from within the story and colonialism, and I felt that from like the Haitian Revolution perspective of like they suffered and then they like overcame like the colonialism, and like they continue to survive despite all of the things that are still continuing to this day that suppress them. So I feel like that was, now that I saw that in the chat, I was like, okay, that makes the ending much more like satisfying to me as well, because I thought it was a little too hopeful from someone who I didn't really get to see much of because we were in Robin's perspective.
Mm-hmm. I think I appreciated that as a balance. And I also think that, I mean, it fit in terms of like, even though it felt like so, I don't know, like just sometimes so bleak to me, there is something to be said about like what that ending says about like the prevailing, like sort of hope of continued, like continued sort of, how do you say, like, you know, I'm thinking of like protests, of continued protests, right? And like how that is a sort of hopefulness, and it really feeds into what she's ultimately saying of like, okay, the only way that these people will care for us is if we die, is as a symbol of insurrection, is as a symbol of violence. But then she stands up and says, not me, I'm gonna live. And so I think that that is kind of like that it represented the two ends of sort of like, you know, rebellion, of where you have the people that do become the cannon fodder, that have to die for the cause and the symbolism, and you have the people that survive and continue to survive, and that even just living is an act of revolution when you are the oppressed group. And so I thought that like showing us both ends was really good and was a really like neat way to tie it up. Still really bleak because ultimately she's going to America. Like, ooh, you know, so there's still like reality attached, but like having that moment of like, you know, my life is a revolution. If I continue to live, I am still kind of part of this as well. I thought that was good.
Yeah. Like the characters overall, like I think part of that distance too sort of made this be a thing for me, is like they sort of felt like mouthpieces for her to say what she wanted to say about some of the theme stuff. Like, you know, again, what they represented, like whatever, in a way that like, yes, all authors have that, like their characters are the mouthpieces. I get that. But like, it was so extreme here because we didn't really feel like we had any intimacy with those characters necessarily. And like that we knew them as characters, just sort of what they represented for the story and within the story. And you know, these like archetypes kind of that they like showed up as. But yeah, like her, I think you did need that at the end of like, that yes, everything gets burned down, but there's still this like there's one little seed of hope within like her, because everyone else went down. Like I was kind of shocked about that. Like I thought it was really just going to be like him, and then it was like, oh no, you all have to stay too. And I was like, oh, like they're all gonna go. So, and that was just her and the other guy that like were able to leave. So yeah, I think you needed that juxtaposition a little bit too.
So in the chat, people were asking if like some of the like lack in Robin's characterization and some of the bizarre things were purposeful, right? Because ultimately, like all of them, this is true for all of them, they are pawns, they're tools. And especially for our three characters of color, they are ripped away from their homes and like stripped of their identity in a way that is like, again, very purposeful for the college to use them basically as these pawns and tools. And the thing is with this, and this is why I struggled with the rating as well, is that even if Kuang did this purposefully, like the intent and the experience are really different. So if you intended on giving us like empty shells of characters because this is the way that they were raised, I understand that intellectually, but in my reading experience, I'm reading empty shells of characters. And so like, you know, there has to be, I don't know, the experience portion of it, even if I can rationalize the reasoning behind why all of these characters felt a little bit removed, it just, I think, still leaves something to be desired when you're actually reading.
Yeah. And I think that also, again, from my experience with the Poppy War, which I will say, I do feel like the Poppy War series was better than this for me, just as like a reading experience, like the explorations and things, of which there are similar things. There's talks of colonialism and talks of racism and whatever, but the theme of war that she does there, I really like. But I think she does a very similar thing with this, like, I'm giving, like, some of these people are tools that we make them into and whatever. And it's like, if you keep doing this within your fiction, is it intentional or is it because this is just what you can do? You know, like it becomes this, like, we're doing the same device again? You know, like, so there's a little bit of that where I'm like, I'm not so sure how much of it is intentional versus how much like is her writing style.
I also like somebody, Paige, you mentioned like how some characters, somebody said in chat, I'm sorry, I'm missing it, but that like the characters represented just like their a country of origin basically, and so it felt a little like stereotypical in that way. I think that they all also represented like an experience with bigotry. So you had like Robin as sort of like the biracial white,
ambiguous,
ambiguous, like white passing in certain circumstances. One, you have the white feminist as well. You have the Black woman, and you have like the brown man, and each of them really experienced like life through that, which I appreciated because it gave us like, you know, different angles or whatnot. But they also felt very like in their archetypes in a way that also felt like very like, this is this person moving through the world, because we didn't get like deeper in with the characters themselves.
I think that leads to like all the time jumping, and normally I'm a sucker for like books that have like the passage of time, like showing people over the course of years, but like at this, I think it made the character suffer for it, like the character and everything. Like going back to what Madi said about the showing versus telling, it just didn't work for me here.
So we talked a little bit about her already, but how did you guys feel about Letty?
Her chapter should be just acts. I don't see what the point of it was, because we didn't learn anything new from it. Like she was who you would think she was going to be from the beginning. When you meet her, I'm like, this is going to be a problem from the beginning to the end.
Literally, like, were any of us shocked that she betrayed them?
No, I was just waiting for the when. I was waiting for the when of when it was going to happen and how bad it was going to be, but you knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, I did not like any of the chapters where we suddenly just got like a little interlude for another character. I think that goes a long way to proving that the like lack of characterization it came to a point where she had to insert interludes and sometimes footnotes that were explaining the character's thoughts.
Yeah.
In a way where I'm like, this should be just incorporated into your story. If you have to like asterisk, like, this is what this person was feeling, you missed a step here in a way that I think is a fault of the writing. And so those interlude chapters, like that's literally when I really felt like, oh, this is what we're missing from the story. Is like all this stuff I just learned about Remy right now. Like, I should have known this all along. Like, where did this come from? So that really threw me off. And then when we got to the Letty one, I was especially like, really? Like,
Yes. And it being like so, like, again, that like 2022 language of like, it's so in your face of like, yes, we sort of know that's how her character is, but some of the things where she was like, but I'm a woman and they get treated, and I was like, Yeah, okay. Like, it was just so, like, on the nose, in a way that, like, yes, like, characters like that and people like that can be so black and white, but it was like, okay, there was ways that this could have been woven into the story. The Remy one is the one that made me the most mad, because I did like his little interlude the most.
Really,
and I was like, I don't feel like I know anything about him besides he snips at Letty, and him and Robin have sexual tension that is never resolved. Like, that is it. Like, that is it. So, yeah, it was a bummer.
Do you think it would have been better if there was multiple POVs?
Kind of. Like, from a Dark Academia perspective, I don't know. Have you guys read The Secret History? Any of you? I have not. Okay. Apparently, this was sort of supposed to be like a response to The Secret History, and The Secret History being like, this Dark Academia thing. I don't know if that one's multiple POV, but I think a lot of Dark Academia is when you have this like group and you get to see all of them. And I think that would have almost been better, because I was even thinking of like, and this is not the same quality wise, but the Atlas 6 book where you get to see everybody. I was thinking when I was reading it of like, oh, I think we could have gotten some of this characterization better if there were multiple POVs. But I think, again, I don't know her, so whatever. But I don't know if she knows how to do multiple POV. I think she gets very fixated on like a certain character, and then she did in Poppy War too. Sometimes she will drop in chapters from other people to kind of give their like perspective. And it's like, but you could have just given me a multiple POV book then.
I think that if you're not doing multiple POV in the story, you need to do a closer kind of narration style to our main character. So first person narration, like give us a reason why we're so limited. So put us in his head. And then that way we're like, oh, we don't get that point of view because we don't, right? We're very focused on this one person, but doing it omniscient or third person and then like, but not giving us enough, I think was like kind of the thing here. So if you're doing that third person, I think we do need the multiple POVs, or like just like commit to the bit and don't give us these like footnotes and these like interlude chapters to be like, oh yeah, about this character you've just spent hundreds of pages with. Here's where they come from.
Yes. Speaking of the footnotes, how did you guys feel about the footnotes?
I like them better reading with my eyes than I did listening to them on audio.
Oh yeah, I'm curious how they did it on audio.
Narrators, and so every time
it took me out of the story. I could not get in. Like when I was reading it, at least it was all my voice, and I could like finish it. Like they would always finish a sentence before they continued the footnote. So for me, I would stop, read, continue.
How were the footnotes incorporated? Like on the same page, or did you have to like
on the same page when there were symbols? And it was so much easier to read. So that's why I like listened to like maybe like 100 pages on audio, and I was like, this isn't going to make me hate this book. I need to like switch back to reading it.
On the Kindle, you have to press the asterisk, and then it's
okay. Oh no, having a physical copy was the way to go with this book. I'm saying have a physical copy if you're reading this.
I wonder like how many people didn't do that though, like reading the Kindle version.
Missing 50% of the book.
If you so there were some footnotes that were in, so again, 2 different audiobook narrators. So there were some where it was like just a pronunciation of like the word. So how was that represented in the footnotes themselves?
It was literally the actual characters in the language.
Yeah, it was like the characters in Chinese. So I was like, so when those happened, I was like, I can't read that anyway. Like it was
that's the one part. It was like I wanted the like pronunciation stuff, but like reading the actual like footnotes, like with the little interludes, I was like, this is taking me out of this book in a way that reading it with my eyes wasn't doing it.
It didn't bother me so much the back and forth, but what I find with like, I say this like, what I find with footnotes, I read like one book like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell also does this like back and forth.
I think she's mentioned that it was inspired a little, like the footnotes were inspired by that.
Okay, and as I was reading, I was like, oh, this, and I hate doing this whenever I'm like, oh, this is like this white author, but I couldn't like get away from like, this feels so much like Jonathan Strange. But the thing with footnotes, and it was a thing here, is that like for me, like 75% of them, I was like, neat, and like 25% of them, I was like, you could have cut that, and we could have kept going. So more good than not, but there were a few that I would have chucked, and like I would have done so. Any other characters? How about Griffin? We talked a little bit about his death. And the reason that I don't like his death didn't impact me is because I was like, I don't like this man at all. And I get what they were trying to do with like putting him as like the face of like violence is the answer. But I thought it was so flat. And I thought that like his like grumbly, like purposefully withholding information, like all of that put together just made a character that I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, I didn't have any strong opinions about him as a character. I liked like the violence disrupting colonialism like idea that he presented, and then was like continued throughout the like latter half of the book. But like he literally was just a vehicle for Robin to figure out, hey, it's bad here. Maybe you should not be doing this. That's what he was.
Yeah. All of the like Hermes Society people or Mez Society people were like, I don't know. Again, I'm comparing a lot to like Poppy War because there's some similarities here where like you get introduced to this like group and then it's kind of like, it doesn't matter because they died. Like some of those, like some of those people, I was just like, okay, like I wish we would have seen more. Like I feel like I say this a lot with books. Sometimes I'm almost like, could this have been a duology? Like, could we have had some more time with like them with the Hermes Society?
Like maybe the stop is like like learning about the like Hermes Society after we like get him really.
They're taken or whatever.
In the university.
Like something like that. Yeah, because all of that, I feel like you know, the people that died in the tower, like the people that died in the Hermes Society, I was like, I feel like we're supposed to care more. And they're just like, and maybe that again, there was this like we're having this conversation about like how much of this was intentional and how much of it wasn't. Maybe there was this like, you know, they're viewed by the world as cannon fodder, and so they're sort of cannon fodder of the book and whatever. But part of me kind of makes me think that it's like, no, she's just like not quite doing enough with the characterization stuff. Because I feel like even like how that society worked is it's like, okay, there's other cells of it, but like, you know, what are they doing? I
still had so many questions at the end about the whole
and
like, what were you guys doing and
yes.
And like I was okay not knowing for a lot of it because it made sense why our characters didn't know, but by the end when we the readers still have no idea like what they were even doing, I was like, oh, I don't know. That just felt like open in a bad way.
Right. Like they said that like there was research that then like, you know, the Babel people were going to take because they were doing all that. I was like, what research were you doing? Like what was happening? You know? And that just nothing comes from that.
And they were like, yeah, we got others out there. And I was like, who? What?
Where? Yes.
What were they doing? Like,
what were they like? I thought they were going to pop up when they were like in the tower, and maybe other cities were going to start going down, and like they didn't. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think the only other person I really cared about was Anthony because he had an interesting backstory, like being enslaved and then being bought out basically by the university to continue translating. That was the only where I was like, I wish we'd had more with this character because he also had a very interesting backstory and we barely got to see any of him before he died.
And we could have gotten more of him because apparently him and Victoire were really close. So if Victoire was the main character, we could have seen him more. Or like even like the I wanted to care more about like the little couple that was like a couple at the end when they were going to get blown up.
Oh yeah, Ibrahim and the girly.
But again, it was like, okay, this was supposed to be this like there's this they formed this bond of love in a very horrible time, and then it's like there's like 2 lines about it and then they died. Like
I also was a little bit confused about what actually happened with Ellie, the one who died, and the desk was still like a shrine to her or whatnot. Like I still have questions about what exactly happened between her and Griffin. And then also like, why did they just keep it as a shrine? Like they were like ends like this that I was just like, wait, come back. You're like, you're not done telling me the story.
Right. And like, why were the professors so all about her? Like they both were almost in tears when talking about her. And all we really get is like, I guess she was a really good student and like she gave a lot of translations, you know, but it was like a lot of them were given a lot of translations. Like, I don't, why is it her? Like that, yes, that was a very weird. And then I guess it was supposed to be like, oh, she was this important figure that, you know, Griffin killed. And you did get that little snippet with him and the other guy. Well, they
they were both like in love with her or something. And they
there was a love triangle.
They just wanted their little footnotes.
Yeah, and I was like, what? Like, so yeah, there were some things that I just felt like were, again, why not just cut some of that part out? Like, do we really need Griffin might be a murderer? I mean, I guess we needed that for like the Chekhov's gun for him to then kill his dad with the same bar that his dad gave him. Why did you give this
he'll
kid?
Never use this on me.
Literally, like I was like, why would you give anybody, even somebody that you think is not brave, like literally a gun? Like you're like you might be getting in trouble with those bad guys, according to them. You know, but I'm going to give you this gun, make you feel, sir. Anyway, so there were some things there that I was like, you could have just cut some of this out because there was too many like loose threads there.
Somebody said in the comments that they didn't like feel for Griffin, but they felt for his message. So one of the like subtitles of this is like the necessity of violence. And so I was like really interested in like the theme overall about like what, because whenever you see like protests, uprisings and things like this, and I'm thinking about like, Black Lives Matter and the height of all of that, sort of the discourse around like, well, violence is not the answer, a peaceful protest only, right? The right way to protest or whatnot. And like for this to have a message about the necessity of violence, I thought was really interesting. The thing I didn't like is that at the end, I don't really think that it convinced me that violence was necessary, because in the end, like what did they, I don't know, it didn't drive home the message of like what they achieved in a way that was like, boom, like violence was the answer. So again, if it would have gone like one step more, perfection. But as it is, I was like, you could have cut out one lecture on translation and gone one step further with like this specific theme of like the necessity of violence, and that would have been perfect for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I thought it said so much when the bridge fell and nothing changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I thought it was interesting, like from the reading like about the Bus of Revolt in Barbados was one that was mentioned, which I was like, woo, yay, our history in the book. And also the Haitian Revolution, like from those perspective of like slave revolts leading to abolition, like that element of where like it wasn't violence that necessarily was successful. Like the Bus of Revolt was successful, like slavery still continued in Barbados after that, but because they had that moment, it led in the future to abolition, because they couldn't like I felt like that was the message basically, was like, here's the failed one, but because this failed doesn't mean that necessarily in the future they're not going to also like stop using this silver, because something's going to happen in the end. But they needed that moment of violence to disrupt the system basically. So like that's what I thought was really interesting, because I never considered it from that perspective ever, but like the violence specifically as a non-violent person just day to day in general. So I was like, oh, this is interesting, and you might be persuading me a little bit. Why am I so angry now? So it was very interesting to read that.
That was the thing. I was like, yeah, like what he says about like violence disrupting and violence being like a shock to the system. And I thought it was really interesting that the counterpoint to that was like, they don't care about the poor people on the bridge or whatever. Like the rich people do not care about this like violence or whatnot, which again just kind of like goes against this idea of like the necessity of violence, because in the end they did not care about the violence enacted on poor people and like brown bodies and any of that. So I wish that and I'm usually somebody with like open endings, I'm like totally okay with them, but I thought that there was like one too many open threads here in a way that when I got to the end and that also wasn't like super connected to any final thing, I was like, oh.
That's why like that whole piece, like I said earlier, about like the characters kind of feeling like mouthpieces. In a lot of ways, I feel like this was an essay made into a novel, where like you write about sort of like colonialism within academia and racism and whatever, and then there's not like an action point. It's just like, here it is, and again, not that this has to teach us anything or whatever, but it felt very like that, where like we're just kind of talking about this. Yeah, it's an exploration, but it's not like it's not something that can be tied up sort of in that like essay form.
Well, to me, like to that end, it felt like a thesis to me, where it gave us a thesis statement, but no conclusion. And as you presented all the research, you gave me the thesis statement. What's your conclusion? Which again, I'm generally a person who really likes open endings. I like to form my own conclusion, but because this felt so like essay-like, so thesis-like, so research-heavy, I was like looking for that at the end, and it felt like it left the taste in my mouth, and I was like,
I think part of it too was like colonialism is still ongoing, especially for like indigenous peoples and countries. So like I feel like I knew like personally, like it can't have a satisfying conclusive ending because it's ongoing. Like it's still going 200 years later. Like this is not going to end in any way, which is why I was like the death makes sense for this story because it's conclusive in terms of who we're following. But like I feel like it was a little bit on purpose for that sense where it didn't really bother me. And also I went into it interested in the idea of colonialism and language being, that was what drew me into the book. Was I like that idea. I like that you're exploring that, and that's what I'm here for. So I was like along for like, how are you doing this? Just take me on your little journey and let me like explore this with you. So I didn't mind any of that.
Yeah. In theory, I don't either. In theory, I like understand all of that. In practice, again, it was like,
It depends on the book for me. This one I was like, listen, I will just take what you give me because it's fun. Like it's something I don't read. Yeah.
Well, like you can even say, like, I know we're all saying, like, I know in the chat it's like, well, there is no answer, there's no correct way to do this, whatever. But she said at the beginning that this is a fiction. So why don't we make like, you know, like this whole well, right now.
But then people complain about Red, White, and Royal Blue having a happy ending because it was realistic. So you can't win here. You cannot win.
Sure, there would be no winning, but it's one of those like that idea of like, oh well, we still have racism now. It's like, but we don't live in the silver world with the translation bars. You know, like so there is. It's not like this was the wrong way to end it, but it just was not that satisfying.
I wonder too, like if my problem is not actually with the ending, but it's like a compounded thing. Like if I had felt more satisfaction with the characters, if I would have been okay with the open ending. But it's like the like everything being a little bit open and a little bit unresolved, and there being like no satisfaction to me in a way is I think what's leaving me kind of like, I don't know. I finished and I was like looking around for more is kind of the way that I felt. And I don't necessarily, I don't know how much I hold that against the book itself. It's just kind of like the overwhelming feeling that I was left with at the end.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree that for me, it is like a cumulative effect thing of like, if there were more elements, like some of these things, this happens every time we have a book that is somewhere in the middle where like, we almost talk more about some of the things that we don't like, just because it is so much more obvious when they like accumulate while still being like, we all are having trouble rating this book because we don't know where we sit with it because it isn't like conclusively like this was bad. Like it wasn't bad. It was just like, there were some things that were just sort of like not quite, I don't know, tied up or, you know, resonated for us personally or whatever.
Yeah, I think that this had excellent ideas. I think that there were moments that will live rent free in my brain. I think that, you know, there were character moments that also I thought were really neat. And the entire idea, the magic system, there was a lot of good here. I think that there were a few like weaknesses that kind of muddy the waters for me in a way. And then again, for me personally, it was just like the discomfort of reading also muddies those waters of like, did I like this? Right. I also before go ahead.
I just have a question about how you guys were feeling about this being such a big book, social media wise, as you're having this experience of not knowing where it sits. And like, because all I've been hearing is like, this is the best book ever written ever. And then I'm sitting here and I'm like, there's like a few issues. And I'm like, but you like, it's one of those books that you almost feel like you're not allowed to talk about. Like, you know, like I have not posted my TikTok review for this because I was like, I need to process this first before I say anything. Yeah. Because if I say anything, I'm gonna have to defend it, like locked down, you know? So I think that there was like, I was having an experience of like, again, being able to recognize that there's like so many things that are good, but also being like, there's also some things that are bad, but there's certain books that we're almost not allowed to talk about the things that are bad because the message is so good, right?
This is a complicated one to me because I think that there are so many different reactions here. Ultimately, this is still a book that I would recommend. And I think that this is a super worthwhile project. And I absolutely understand, even though I didn't have like a 5-star experience with it, I understand why people did. You know, and so like, this isn't one of those books that I'm like, I don't understand what anybody I totally get it. And like, this is one of those books too, that like the effort there like means a lot. And like, it goes a long way to like being like, this was so well researched. That, I don't know, that puts something in there. I think also that there is a lot to be said for like the reflection of an experience of like anybody who has experienced racism or colonialism, where this could mean a lot, like Paige said, to see that reflected in a way that I also see that like being pushed up. There was also, I don't know, for the people who are not on TikTok, there was also a big like blow up because a white man on TikTok with it, he doesn't have a huge audience, but he's known for his hot takes. So he goes viral pretty regularly. So he like made this whole video that was basically like, Babel's going to be the biggest book of the year. I'm not going to read it. And he made very disparaging comments about it, like just basically what the project was of it being, you know, he basically said, if I want to learn about racism, I'll just read nonfiction kind of thing. Very dismissive of the entire thing. So a lot of like the book talk community, like spoke out against sort of this thinking. So I think because the first reaction, even pre-publication, especially on book talk, was defense, it kind of feels like now that we've read it, I'm like, okay, well, I do have some notes.
right, yes.
Not like the white man. Like,
no, we are not the same. Like he said so many things about like, it's just for people that missed being at school and whatever. It's like, that's not what it's about, like, at all. But yeah, it's one of those things where like you feel like there's two sides, and it's like there's actually more than two sides, but because he set himself up as this gross person that he is, then there's this like, I feel like there's been an extra rallying around it in response to some of that.
Yeah.
This is sort of like, it feels like an Addie LaRue to me, where like there was the obvious talk of colonialism in that book, where like she should have met a person of color at some point in that book, but it still was so like, it's still a 4 for me because I enjoyed the overall element of it. And I feel like it's the same for this sort of situation where it's like there were elements of it I didn't enjoy, and like I am off of book talk, booktube enough that I'm not really swayed. I had a couple of people in my real life who were really excited that I was reading it because none of them had read it, and they were like, I've heard good things. So I was lucky that I was like on the back burner, but I knew that people were really enjoying it on that, and I was like, that's not gonna impact me. No one cares what I think when I'm reading a book outside of this little book club anyway, so we're good.
Yeah. I also think that like I struggle with the entire concept of like reading fiction to learn about like racism, and I absolutely agree that there are ways that you can explore like bigotry and like big themes in fiction that you can't necessarily like in other mediums. And I do think that reading makes us more empathetic, and there's a lot that we get out of fiction. But I think there's almost like a reaction to books like this where it's like held in such high regards because it's like, it taught me about racism. And it's kind of like, I get it, and I'm happy that this like set you on a path about learning more about colonialism and the way that language is colonized and things like that. But like that, it's still number one a book, and we can still sort of like talk about it as a book and its elements as a book, but also please pick up some nonfiction.
Yes.
Even some of the things that were sourced and cited in this book, I am begging you, do not make a fictional work sort of what you stand up on to be like, I have learned all I need to know. So there's some of that, like it feels like some of that in like the conversations that are coming up around this in a way that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, where I'm just like, ooh, I'm happy this opened your eyes. However, like, read some more, please.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely feels like there's a little bit of, and this is something that we talk about as far as like analyzing books online and people not necessarily having the nuance of like the things that we're critiquing about this book are just like writing stuff about any book in general. We are not critiquing like the message. We're like, the message is fine. The message is good. Like that, all of that and the translation stuff and colonialism within that, yes. But there are like elements of, again, like characterization, some of those things that are flawed. But some people might just hear, you think the book is bad? And it's like, no. We're talking about different things here that I think can be really hard with some of these bookish spaces when they choose sort of a book like this. Like you're saying, there's something about like people sometimes can virtue signal with books like this.
Yes.
That can make it kind of muddy when you are talking about critiquing stuff.
And we're almost wrapping up, and I do want to get to our ratings, but there was one element that we've talked about, but I just, in general, want to hear what you thought about the plot and the pacing. Did you struggle at all with this? Did you think it was slow or fast, or like, what was your experience? Because I was sending some pain updates very early. I was like, oh, I keep needing to take breaks. But then I read like the books 4 and 5, basically. I read like this, like I could not put it down. It was like all the way to the end. 1 through 3, I needed breaks frequently throughout. So how did you guys experience the plot and the pacing?
Yeah, exactly the same. Like I read the last chunk so quickly. Like I sat down and read it in one afternoon, like on this couch. But the first 3, I was like, I had to force myself to sit down and read it and like get the audiobook at one point to start getting through it while I was doing other things. Cause it was like a lot slower in the setup and like going through all the years that we need to get through to get to the actual conclusion portion.
Yeah, it's really interesting how like quickly I read the last half, where it like literally took like maybe a week or a time period, and then the first half of the book is just like, okay, next year.
Yes,
definitely. Like post,
you felt the years passing.
Yes, post like his dad, like him killing his dad. I think it's so funny that we keep saying his dad when like he didn't refer to him as his dad. But we're like, screw you.
Yeah.
But when post that, it was like, okay, now like like stuff is happening. But yeah, like especially when we were having the live show earlier, I was like, I'm not gonna make it, and I always make it. Everyone should know I always read it early. The fact that I was like, I'm not gonna make it. It was like that. Just kind of the pacing, yeah, like, but there were parts of it at the end that, again, I felt like didn't necessarily get enough time, and then there's parts at the beginning that like we gave too much time to.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I am not somebody that, like, on principle, like, I don't like a slow beginning and like whoosh, you know, or at the end. But to me, the difference between the slow and the fast can't be so great that it feels kind of like whiplash. And I think in this one, it was too good. It's too great. It was too slow at the beginning and then too fast at the end. And in a way that, again, felt like a flaw to me. I felt like this could have been a little tightened. I think that it could have been a little more evenly paced. And again, it would have reached like that 5-star perfection, like best book of the year, if some of that stuff had been done. But as it is, it's kind of like a little laggy to me.
Fair.
Okay. So I think all that's left, if you guys have any questions that we didn't talk about in the comments, you can put them in. But let's go. We have to rate this. No,
I'm not going first.
I'm ready. I can go. I can tell you guys. 4.5, which is like where I was in the beginning. Like I knew going into this what it was going to be, because it was like I knew what my expectations were and they met like what the book was. There are flaws, which is why it's 4.5, but I could reread this and find something new to enjoy in it. And like I really want to reread books. So
yeah, I'm 4. I think the flaws were big enough that it's a full star deduction. I was closer to 3.5 at the beginning of this conversation, but I think in talking through it, I really am impressed with like the scope and the project of this all. I don't know. I might like eat for the next like week worth between like 3.5 and 4, but I do think it is 4. I think it's a 4-star book.
I'm gonna give it 4 too, only because I just can't see myself giving it anything lower because of the work that was put into it. Also, the scene that I talked about at the beginning of the live show about them comforting Letty, like that's just worth 4 stars at least, in my opinion. So yeah, 4 stars.
I think I'm doing. I hate being a white woman that's giving this the lowest rating. I hate that. But 3.5 to 3.75, because so I looked at my spreadsheet as you guys were talking, and I put some like numbers in there, but I thought I could kind of change it. Like the atmosphere and the like themes part of my stuff is like in the 9 and 10 range. It's out of 10 on my spreadsheet, and then like the enjoyment and the characterization is like in the 6 range, and so it evens out to being like a 3.75 score. So, but it feels like you're right though. Like as like the work that went into it is like 4-star work, but like my enjoyment and the flaws are like a 3-star.
You know, part of what I do when I rate is like enjoyment and quality, but also comparison. Part of why I use a star rating system is it helps me compare books, right? And I think about all of my 1-star books. And then if I read something really bad, I'm like, is this as bad as Twilight? And then I can kind of compare, you know, and say like, yes, that belongs in my 1-star. So I think about my 3-star books, and Babel doesn't belong there. And I think about my 4-star books, and I'm like, okay.
Listen, I think we read some bad stuff, or like for this book club, this book shines by comparison.
Oh yeah,
to the shit I read this year. It's a 4.5.
100% of the year, I think.
Yeah,
like,
100%. There's no way.
That's also why I had a hard time too, because I'm the same way that you are, Mari, with my star ratings, where I'm like, okay, they are sort of by category, and I'm like, yeah, it doesn't belong in 3 necessarily for me because of how I kind of like, usually 3s are like just sort of mediocre across the board for me, or fine across the board, so it doesn't really belong there. This is like almost a book that's like outside of the rating system for me, because I'm like, it's too hard, like, because even my other 4s, I'm like, but a lot of my 4s I have more of like a close, intimate feeling with, and I don't have it there either. So I'm like, because I go, I'm like, I go a lot on like, I'm like, it's a 3.75, but also 4 and like 4.5 for themes and like the work that went into it. So this is going to be a hard book to ever talk about, actually. It doesn't belong on a rating system.
My thing too with my own ratings is that a 3-star, I always think about it of like the book having equal pros and cons. That's a 3-star to me, like equal strengths and weaknesses. Whereas a 4-star book had more strengths than weaknesses. And a 5-star book is like maybe like 1 or 2 quibbles, but like no things like, so that in my head, when I'm categorizing that way, that feels more like a 4-star, where there are more strengths than weaknesses to me in this book, versus like in the middle of like equal strengths and weaknesses. So
that's funny. I know we're talking about star ratings now, but for me, and is literally a 2.5. So like my equal books are in the 2-star range.
2.5
like,
is like, I hated that.
See, if a book, because for me, I'm like, it's the middle of 5, right? So like for my brain, it's like a book that has equal good and bad is 2.5. So maybe for me, 3s are slightly better than 3s are for you guys.
I think that is the case. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway.
I don't know if we did it, but we did something.
We tried. I knew this was going to be a discussion. This is a great book.
This is a great book club book. This is
a great book club book.
Yeah.
Like great book to be assigned in classes. Like great, doing like discussions with. Like, and this is definitely still a book that like is very recommendable.
Yes.
As well.
And I think in addition to being like, I can't actually think of all of the books that we read this year, but I can like confidently say that this will be at the top of like what we read.
100%.
But also like this was a lot of times when we're thinking about like doing a discussion, we're kind of like, I don't know if we have an hour's worth, but this one we were just like,
yeah.
Felt like really good to discuss. I had a lot of thoughts and feelings about it. I love books that elicit reactions versus a lot of books that we read this year. I was like, I literally have no feelings about
just read it.
We just read
it.
Like eke out 40 minutes of talk about it. We're like at an hour 9. If we wanted to talk more, I probably could. So like, all right. Well, our book for this month, for October, will be The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. Super excited. One of my favorite authors. So that I think should also be good because she's usually very good with her themes and descriptions as well. So when will we have that live show? We said the first week of November-ish, or did we?
Like right around Halloween, a little after.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So as always, we'll announce it. But just planning for
it will be earlier because some of us will be a different time zone.
Yes, it'll be in the afternoon instead of at night.
It will not be night. It will not be at night American time.
Yes, it will probably be like Saturday afternoon.
Like an afternoon, yes.
Yeah.
All right. Anyways, we'll announce it. Hope you guys read along with us again next time. Thanks for joining this discussion. We had a great time as well. And see you then.
Bye. Bye.